All right, 7:02, let's make a start. Welcome everyone. Thanks for taking the time to spend with us this evening. We really believe this webinar will be of great value to you, whether you have plans to expand your property portfolio or simply to get your foot in the door with your first property, because we all know doctors love property. My name is Kimberly. I'm one of the relationship directors with Avant Finance based in Brisbane, and it is an honour to be your host tonight. Avant has been around for 100 years supporting our doctors with your insurance needs, but you may or may not know that we have also diversified into having a dedicated law team in Avant Law to support our doctors when it comes to any legal issues you may come up against, but also to assist in your personal lives when it comes to building wealth and securing your futures. Tonight, we have Lindsay McGregor from Avant Law, a solicitor specialising in property, residentially and commercially. Avant has also most recently introduced our Avant Finance team to assist our doctors with your finances, whether it be to build wealth and buy property or to support you in your careers as you progress. We have relationship directors nationwide, but on panel tonight, we have Jessie Cannon, a relationship director based in Sydney. And last but not least, the star of our show, we have the pleasure of having Rusty Bybart from Get Rare Properties, a buyer's agent and property strategist who has helped many of our clients with achieving their property goals. And not to mention, he's also a best-selling author for his book, The Property Wealth Blueprint. For all attendees tonight, you will have the opportunity at the end to secure a free copy via a QR code, so stay tuned for that. Now, before we begin, we do have to put out that everything talked about within this webinar is general in nature and does not take into consideration your financial position, objectives, or needs. So if you do have any questions or need specific advice, feel free to reach out to us and we can recommend qualified specialists who will be able to help. Which leads me to my next point. You may have noticed that we have disabled the chat function. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A section. We have Mornay Lombard, one of our relationship directors based in Brisbane, going through and answering your questions in the background. If your question is specific and or cannot be answered during this webinar, we will get in touch directly. So please leave your first name and surname initial showing rather than asking anonymously. Towards the end of this webinar, we'll also have a live Q&A session where Jessie, Lindsay, and Rusty will be able to answer your top trending questions. Without further ado, I would like to pass on to you, Rusty.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. Really appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for joining this webinar. Just very quickly, talking about myself, I am an architect. So I wanted to be an architect. I became one with a passion for property, for love for property, but then I had to change my career from architecture to IT. I did master's computer science and then focus on the data science. And then one more time, I made a career change to finance. So I did my MBA in finance, did CFA, and ended up working with a bank, focused on the strategy and investment. So I was managing $2 billion funds. And then what we really did on the sideline, because we realized that, yes, it was a very good job, very refreshing at the same time, very challenging. But then on the sideline, we realized that there's not much money that we are saving for ourselves. So we actually started investing in properties. So in 2011, we started investing. And then together with my wife, Rupali, we are able to build a portfolio of 18 properties. And the portfolio value is about 10 million plus. And the equity over the period of time has grown to $5 million. So just sharing that how my journey as a qualified architect, IT professional, and fund manager turned into a successful property investing, but it's not about me. What we have done as a group, as a Get Rare Properties, we actually had 300 plus families, bought over $100 million plus worth of properties, where properties has gone up by $40 million plus. So I'm just sharing with you my background. Very quickly, we'll be talking about that why property investing for doctors, how it can really be used for unlocking your financial freedom, as well as the way I was able to do it, because now I quit my job as a fund manager. I'm following my passion, and this is one of my passion to share my knowledge, how I've done it. So why we should be thinking about property investing, what to consider around that. And then more importantly, we'll be focusing major part of this conversation today on how to go about doing it. Of course, as you might have heard, any investing is risky, and so is property investing. So how we can really think about embracing those risks or managing those risks. So of course, we'll be talking about portfolio approach, And also, like, it's not really a one-man show, it's really a team play. And we really need to have multiple teams for different proficiencies, and we'll talk about that. So how we really go about doing it is having a portfolio and having a team. So, so very quickly, I've written a book, as Kimberly mentioned. It is actually available to you. Towards the end, we'll share the QR code. And we got really some recognition. And more importantly, we get invited to contribute to different forums, talking about the market and how to really strategize, think about the portfolio. So why should doctors invest in property? Certainly, you are on average on a high tax bracket. Of course, at the same time, it means that you're paying a lot of taxes. So there's some tax benefit when we think about property investing. Yes, there's a negative gearing. Yes, really means on paper you're losing money. But I think best to answer the other benefits which we have on the screen, maybe my co-panelist Lindsay would be able to run through a few of the elements here.
Yeah, thank you.
Lindsay, please.
The reason I like property is because it's real. It's something you can touch. It's something that's tangible, and it's something that you can take control over. It's also something that you can diversify your portfolio. So you can own residential property, you can own commercial property, you can own industrial property, and you can also own it in different vehicles. So you can get certain tax benefits from owning it in a different structure or vehicle. But it's just something that helps generate income. It is something that you can also leverage off. So Jesse can run through that later on, but that's something where you can borrow money to buy further properties and really leverage what you've got. It's also a very good asset for protecting it for future generations. So we'll talk about that a little bit later on, but something that you can pass down to your family through your will or through some other trust structure.
No, great. Thank you so much for pointing that. Yes, there is a illiquidity as well. Like, it's not really easy to sell the property, but of course it means that we can diversify in different asset classes. But then talking about asset classes, it's not just the property that we should be investing in. That there are two growth asset classes in this country which are very popular. Assets like shares and properties. And typically I've really got this question all the time that where should we be investing? And my brief answer is that probably in both, but let's talk about the performance of these two asset classes. So this is a chart compiled by AMP Capital, where I used to work earlier. So as you can see in the chart, like, this is more of a performance for the last 100 years or so. We have seen that Australian shares has given 11.2% per year on average. And Australian residential property market, which is depicted by blue line, is not too far behind, giving a total return of 10.9%. So let me clarify, it's a total return. It means cash flow, as in the rent you collect, plus the capital growth. So if you look at it, it's not too different, but then there's a reason, like, first of all, blue line is a lot more smoother, so it means it's less volatile. Yes, it has a, benefits as well, like, which Jesse would be able to talk about, is the element of leverage. So if you just put 10% from our own pocket and think about on average, it is giving 10.9. So effectively it is kind of doubling. So Jesse will be able to talk about, like, even as a medical practitioner, there's a lot more benefit for you from that profession, that it can be a lot more leverage as well, which Jesse will talk about in a moment. So again, coming back to this, like, where should we be investing? Shares or properties? Probably both. A lot more diversified portfolio is a lot more powerful, a lot more robust. But let's talk about properties, because this is what the webinar or the topic is today is. So how many of you knew that in 1980, the national median house value was 76,500? And in 2023, it's 770. So it has gone literally 10 times in 43 years. Wow. How many of you really wish you yourself, your parent or your grandparent have bought properties for you? Right? I asked this question in a more live environment, and the answer I get is as many as we could. Right? If I extrapolate the same returns, like, it's just actually only 5.6% capital growth. Thanks, Pramod, over there. If you really see this happening over the next 43 years, that would really mean the same national median house would really be slightly over 7 million. The question we should be asking, will it continue? But before we talk about that, let's look at the top rich BRW 200 people list. And we have found almost about 40% of rich people have made wealth through real estate. Now, question is like, it's not really right for us to just look at the history and then extrapolate in the future. So the question that we should be asking is, first of all, what is really driving the growth here? What's really growing that 6% on average capital growth? And more importantly, will it continue? So let's look at some factors. So on the screen, we have few there. So as we know, population growth, just last year alone, yes, during the COVID years, we didn't really had many people coming in the country. But then last year alone, 660,000 people came in. We have on average, we have high disposable income. Government is on a spending spree. They are going for a nationwide infrastructure spending that is leading to unemployment. So the last data we are seeing is that 4% unemployment rate, which is one of the phenomenal if you look at the global economy. And then, as we know, there's a lot of, yes, real estate is very expensive, but the challenge is that we live only in those 5 major cities, but then there's exodus to affordable boom. What it means is that people are saying that, okay, where we can afford, rather than buying in the metros, can we really go next door town where they can commute from? And thanks to the technology and the likes. Plus, we are really thinking about inflation. That's probably guiding the interest rate decision by the RBA. But if you really look at the bottom of it from the fundamentals, property investing is actually, or properties as asset class is actually a hedge against inflation. And then despite of being a huge country, we have a very limited supply of livable land. So all these factors really say that, okay, property investing would probably continue. However, here's a catch. And the catch is not all properties are the same. And that's where we really need to be mindful that where exactly what price, what property at what price, what place we should be buying, because not all are the same. So here, what we're really seeing is that in this country, we have about 15,400 suburbs and towns. And there's always, despite of the economic cycle, there's always somewhere struggling and there's always somewhere flourishing. And that's where a savvy investor should really be mindful where they should be investing. So this is where the fundamental research that I've done as equities analyst are bringing those kind of learnings and the way we actually approach investing in the realm of property investing. So of course, as we saw that the factors that define how we should be, like why property investing should be, is a savvy investment is back on the fundamentals. So we really look at those elements like infrastructure, population growth, land supply, economic outlook. But at the same time, I said that it's a huge country. So what we really rely on is the data. So quantitative screening helps us. So we look at about 32 different factors and based like there are a few on the screen. And that really helps us to really pinpoint to a handful of suburbs or regions. So SA actually stands for statistical area. So a census data that gets collected by the government, we really buy those data elements and then try to look at all the projections of the population, the economic, the household size and the likes for us to really make some insights about it to really make decisions. It's not really straightforward, like, looking at the state policies or the state laws, like what's happening there. Takes a set of things, like whether it's land tax or the holding costs and whatnot. We really look at the data, not just the data in time, but look at the trends in making. Because when we are talking about technicals, it's a trend is friend. We have learned in the investing world. Effectively, this is research is actually science and art. So we can't really just rely on the science alone or data. We really need to go in and understand the market. And that's really highlights the power of due diligence, like the ground learnings about that area, like why we should buy in this particular suburb, why we should buy in this particular street. And that really is a focus of our team that we can go and understand those handful of suburbs that we actually shortlisted here. And then we build our know-how, we build our network in that area. As an example, this is a map of the town Orange, which is a regional town in New South Wales, about 3 hours drive west of Sydney. Now, this by again, we have figured out that, okay, we should be investing in this particular town as an example, just an example. We really need to understand like which particular pockets are really worthwhile investing. So if you look at the southwest of this town, depicted by red color, that's where the public housing is concentrated. And what it means is that it's a very big churn of the tenants. They don't really take care of the property. And ideally, you might not want to raise your kids in that particular neighborhood. So if you can start thinking about the owner occupier who would like to live in those properties, that really makes a huge, or that makes a good investing. So as an example, the next door dark blue area, that's very really where a good catchment is defined of a good school. And that's where the houses have the Christmas lights, and it's a lot more lively. The yards are clean and whatnot. So the value over here of the property is bound to grow more. So this kind of a screening we do at multiple levels. And in interest of time, we'll probably just skip that. But it really is the key essence here is that property investing is not just about properties, like lots of people actually like to believe in. The reality is property investing is actually about people, like who we are targeting, what the demographics that we're targeting, and then buying the property, which is most common, because then the demand for that kind of property grows more. So that is the essence of like how we are able to independently pick the right property in the right area that is more bound to grow more. And that has been the formula that we have applied for ourselves and for the families that we've been helping. So let's talk about Dr. Lin here. He's a radiologist, and he just bought a property of his own. And he thought, okay, this is great, like I should be buying property, but then he's staring at his loan against his home. And we connected earlier this year, and we said, okay, like what we should be doing. So we built a plan for him, and then we bought this property for him in WA, as in close to Perth city. We bought this property in January 24. We secured it at about 622. And by way of our negotiations, so not only just about identifying the region and identifying the property, we actually go as a professional negotiator. And then we were actually like 25K already in front by negotiating the property price down. The property got settled in March 24. And in his words, it was like he was able to buy this interstate off-market property without even seeing the property. But of course, we equipped him with all the information and data so that he can take really the confidence of buying this property. But fast forward 5 months now, the value is sitting at 690,000. So I can see that equity is almost about 70,000. And that is really the essence, that how his money that he has been earning is working harder for him. And of course, we were able to use Jesse's proficiency in getting him the right loan, which we'll talk about in a moment. But effectively, he didn't really put that much money, but he kind of made this money by just taking that decision. And that is the message that I would like to give here or convey here, so that you can walk away with that kind of curiosity that how it can work for you, just like it has worked for him. But the problem is, it's very powerful, like somebody making 70K just like that by making a decision, yet people fail. So I really want to bring that element that not every property investing is a successful story. So let's look at some data. So when we look at Australian Bureau of Statistics data, 50% of investors sell their investment property within first 5 years. Now, you may wonder like why, if it was working, why they're selling, almost like half of them are selling it back. But people who actually end up holding those properties, 72% of property investors have only one investment property, and 18% have only 2 investment properties. So effectively, 72 plus 18, 90% of property investors have only 1 or 2 investment property. So if it was really working for them, why did the majority of them actually stop after 1 or 2? Because when we are talking about financial freedom, 1 or 2 property will not make a cut. We really need to think about how to make it more of a robust portfolio. And that is being achieved by less than 1% of property investors who actually end up buying 5 or more properties. Now, if you think about the context of 1,000 property investors in our room, it's actually achieved by less than 10 people, 10 property investors in that room. So now the question that I would ask is, what is it that makes a specialist or more of a successful property investors successful compared to the average 90%? And the answer is that of the strategy and due diligence. So let me take about 5 or 10 minutes just talking about the strategy element of it, because due diligence is more about, as I said, picking the right market, picking the right property and negotiating it. But next 10, 15 minutes will be more around the strategy, like how you should be thinking about it to build a portfolio. So the biggest or simplest analogy that I could really bring or think about the strategy in property investing is that of a GPS. Probably it's a rhetoric question that how many people use it, because answer I get is almost everyone uses GPS these days. Now, there are a few elements to it that actually it helps us really plan our trip. It gives us a kind of certainty, but it works on three principles. One, it really needs to know where you really want to end up. So you need to put your destination, the specific coordinates that you really want your GPS to take you to. Second, it works automatically thanks to technology to work it out where exactly you are. So effectively where you are today, where you really want to be. And then there's other element of it, your preferences. Do you want to take a scenic route? Do you want to pay a toll road and the likes? So once you have three things, where you are, where you want to go, and your limitation constraints or preferences, then it can map out a blueprint for you to get you there. Now, would it be nice for each one of us to have a GPS like this for your property investing? With that question in mind, together with the team, we were able to build this Get Rare model. So RARE stands for R for review, A for aim, R for raise, E for enjoy. So here, what we are saying is just like in GPS, we need to start with the end goal. When we begin with the end in mind, like we can really, by the way, it's on the terms of like your lifestyle, the holidays, the passive income you want to generate. So once we have the vision of that, the belief of that, then we really go about, okay, where we are today, like what number we have today, how much we can borrow and the likes. So where you are to where you want to go, but then we really need to respect the preference of the limitations or the constraints around how much are you saving on an annual basis, or what's your risk profile? Not just your willingness to take risk, but also your tolerance of taking risk. Then how much you can really borrow. I mean, you might be shut down by the bank that, okay, you can't borrow anymore. So understanding all of those elements, then we build a blueprint, which is actually the title of the book as well, the Property Wealth Blueprint. And it really goes in detail of the theory that I'm talking about. And of course, you can see some things in action as well. And what we are saying is that where we are to where we want to go, understanding your preferences, building that blueprint, and then just like in our physical journey, we take one turn at a time. Here we are raising our portfolio one property at a time, building security, building equity, and adding up on your monthly rental income. I thought this might be easier for me to demonstrate as an example, but the first thing first, we are not really talking about buying a multi-million-dollar property and putting all the eggs in one basket, but rather thinking of more of a portfolio approach. So because we are buying for the local demography that we should be buying, it's always about thinking more fundamentally that it's a pure investment. So rather than thinking of the property that I or you would like to live in, think of it as purely as an investment. And then that means that rather than buying multi-million-dollar properties, let's diversify that amount in few properties. So rather than buying a $3 million property, let's buy 600, 700, which is like an average affordable property for a regular Aussie. Buy them, multiple of them. Of course, it helps us diversify for growth, diversify for risk as well. Of course, at the later stage, we need to sell them as well. So it allows us to sell one property at a time rather than trying to think of selling one room of a bigger property, right? Which is of course not practical. So it's a portfolio approach. Now talking about the model, it's again 4 stages of Get Rare model. What we're really saying on the screen, which you can see, there are 4 stages: acquire the portfolio, sit on it, let it grow, and then consolidate. And then once it is all paid off, then we really enjoy the passive income or the freedom that we can appreciate. Maybe if I can demonstrate this as an example, again, starting with the end goal, if the goal is for 200K passive income, as in $200,000 income that you would like to generate from your property investing, again, this doesn't really mean that you quit your practice. It just means that you have financial freedom. You can choose to take break if you want to. You're breaking the shackles. So you are not doing what you do by force, but by a choice. So again, this is just as an example. If you really need 200K passive income annually coming in every year in your pocket, it translates to about roughly $5 million debt-free portfolio. How I calculated 5 million is basically we are using assumption of 4% yield or a division by 25 of term called in finance. What it means that you collect about 4% of what wealth you have. So effectively what we are saying is to achieve that, let's build a 5 million wealth. And to do that, imagine how long it would take in a traditional way of savings to get to that number. sometimes it might take a long while to get there. Few lifetimes, sometimes maybe. So to how do we really go about achieving that is basically you're saying is that let's build a portfolio and build an equity of 5 million. For those who doesn't know, equity is basically the difference between the portfolio value minus the loan or the owing that you have against the bank. So as an example, if you have $9 million portfolio and a 4 million loan, you are actually having a 5 million equity. So now we have translated this equation of 200K passive income to effectively 5 million equity in your portfolio. The day you have 5 million equity, you can move from your stage number 2 to stage number 3. But the question is, how do we get to the stage number 2? It's only about building a leverage portfolio. Now, leverage is, as probably would know, it's more about borrowing other people's money. So when we borrow money, as an example, I talked about the average performance of a property market in Australia, it's about 11%. So if we as a borrower or as an investor, we borrow at about 6% and invest at 11%, we are actually making a 5% profit year on year by default. And of course, if we do the right research and we buy a property, just like Dr. Lam bought, like he actually had 11% within 5 months, we are actually making it a far quicker journey on that direction. So effectively what we are saying is let's build a leverage portfolio. And that really becomes a critical stage in this scenario. How do we go about building that portfolio? Of course, there's a lot of elements here. First of all, it's more about your wish, your desire to be there, and then building a team and then buying these properties one at a time. Now, typically, traditionally, the investors, what they do, they buy one property, they let it grow, and then come back to buy the next property. But to really short circuit this and really do this in a more mathematical, more systematic way, the whole idea is to acquire this portfolio as quickly as possible, because only once you have acquired it, then the stage 2 starts to let it grow. The whole idea is to make it risk averse so that it really doesn't makes you lose your sleep when things are going, haywire, like interest rates changes or the economic outlook. So we really need to be thinking about building a robust portfolio, more diversified portfolio. And when we are buying a first or the second, the element or the mindset should be that how can I come back and buy my next property? Because when in the beginning, when we are starting, we do not have enough funds to buy the first property. So when we figure out first property, then not only you are working to generate your savings, your property is also working hard to generate the equity that again, someone like Jesse can go and extract that and help you buy your next property. So we can keep doing that, but then there will be some stage whereby the banks will start saying, no, you can't really borrow anymore. And that's when we need to turn to a cash flow generating properties, a lot more focus on that so that we can keep the doors open for the bank. So as you can appreciate, the stage 1 is the most critical one. Again, we are not really just talking about the stages in general. We really go deep dive and really help you or help anyone that you're working with to build that blueprint, that how, based on what your desires, what your long-term goals are, how many properties it really needs for you to acquire that portfolio, and then how many years it will take for you to get there. So just to really demonstrate this blueprint, what we're saying is that let's build, in this example, number of 6 properties very quickly. And as the portfolio value grows up, of course, it's never a straight line. It's always moving up or down. But as we know, the long-term fundamentals are pretty strong. We for this demonstration only, we are assuming a straight line. As the portfolio grows, your equity, which is depicted by real line, grows. And once you hit your target of required equity, then you can choose to consolidate and enjoy your freedom. So effectively, this investment strategy serves as a GPS. And this really helps us really have that clarity that how many properties you need to buy, how many and where we need to stop, and really appreciating all those elements like your risk, your borrowing power, your leverage, and the likes. And once we are clear that what we need to be buying in a property, we really need to be mindful that, okay, are we buying for cash flow? Are we buying for capital growth? And of course, we need both. We cannot really tilt everything towards capital growth because then it will start impacting our lifestyle. But then if you keep buying everything for cash flow, then the challenge is the growth rate, it slows down. And of course, equity is more around the bargains, how well you're buying the property. In the example that we talked about, Dr. Lam was able to get equity, upfront equity of 25K. So more we can buy in the middle is the ideal, but that's a dream. So essentially that doesn't really happen. So with a strategy, what we need to be thinking about, let's buy a few properties here for capital growth. Let's buy a few properties for cash flow. And as a portfolio, it really right comes in the middle smack of what you really prefer. So essentially the idea is that it should be very balanced, because it's not really just about the components of your return or cash flow capital growth. I would emphasize that we really need to be mindful of the risk of the borrowing money that we are talking about, so that we can still sleep well, yet we can imagine or visualize our future. So it's more about not just it's not just about returns, it's also about the risk that we need to take, we need to embrace. Lots of people say investing in properties is risky, and my take is not investing enough is also risky. So we really need to be mindful of your circumstances, and then really come with a strategy or the blueprint for you that suits your risk profile. So our in philosophy, in a nutshell, is like the strategy, that where you are to where you want to go, and appreciating all of that in the long run, that should define what type of property should you buy. Like, should we buy a commercial property? Should we buy a capital, or residential? Should we buy new or old? Should we buy regional or city? Should we buy a townhouse or unit? There's so many questions. Let that be defined by your strategy, right? And once we know what strategy you're going for, what type of property should we buy, what sort of maintenance costs, what sort of negative gearing you are looking for, all of that leads into then us or anyone that you're working with pick the right market where we can see the imbalances of the supply and demand. That goes back to the fundamentals of property investing, where we should be buying. But before we get into the third step on this chart, really need to be mindful of what type of property and whether it aligns with your long-term strategy. Once we know this, what region, then we pick the property, then we pay the right price. So essentially, the two differences that we talked about between an average property investor versus a successful investor is that of the strategy, which is covered by these two elements, and the due diligence, which is about picking the right property in the right market and paying the right price. And the essence of focusing on this strategy is probably highlighted by Abraham Lincoln, that if you give me 6 hours to chop down the tree, I'll spend the first 4 hours sharpening the axe. And this is the sharpening of the axe. It's really not just about strategy, it's also about your team and having that vision and that, your planning part of it. Just like before you sit in the car, you'd know that in few hours time, you'll be at your destination. It's exactly that. You know your strategy, that you'll be there. And also just on this, while we are on this slide, see how many people actually focus on these last two items. They just focus on the property and what price they're paying. They think that, okay, my smart friend has bought a property in that area, I should just go and jump into it. As a medical practitioner, you know the best, like it's the same diagnosis or same medicine doesn't really go until we know whether the same diagnosis are not there. So it's more personalized, it's for you before you jump into doing that. This again, I'll be to demonstrate this. Let me use this example of Dr. Kumar. He's a specialist by trade. He has fully paid off his home worth $1.6 million. So effectively, and that's PPOR, as in principal property of residence. And he was sitting with 100K in cash, and we caught up late last year. And he was like, Rusty, how do we go about doing it? Yes, I follow this. And then we build up that plan exactly the way we talked about. His aim was to build a $7 million portfolio very quickly. And that's what we assisted with. And to come up with a plan, build a team. We worked together with the one team, and then we bought this first property. So we bought this property in January 24, some discount there, probably still in March 24. But because now he has a plan, he's focusing on his acquisition stage. Next month, we got next property for him, WA, third property in Queensland, and fourth property in Victoria. So 4 properties in 4 different states, and they were all off market. For those who doesn't know off market listing, what it means is it never hit the market. We as a specialist buyer's agent, we were able to source these properties straight from the seller or the sales agent before they hit the market. And the reason why we were able to build this 4 well-diversified portfolio for Dr. Kumar is with the help of the likes of Lindsay, who has to know about all the rules and regulations. So maybe, Lindsay, if you don't mind sharing, like why it is important to have, I guess, a diversified portfolio, which you mentioned earlier, But we need a lawyer and a solicitor, the conveyancing side of things.
Yeah.
How would you go about doing this?
So there's two things to raise here, really. The first one is about having a diversified risk portfolio. So having properties in different states helps diversify that risk. And one of the biggest risks you have is the costs of maintaining that property, and one cost is land tax. Now, land tax is a state-based tax that's taxed on your entire holdings. So it might be the case that you pay less land tax if you've got properties spread across the country. But one thing that I can do to help with that is give you continuity of legal advice. And so my background is I started off as a lawyer in Brisbane, and then I moved to Sydney, then I went back to Brisbane. And so over the past 22 years, I've moved between Brisbane and Sydney. I've also got team members in Victoria, and due to the technology that's available now, we're able to help in Western Australia as well. So we can really cover you wherever you want to buy property. It's a good thing to have one person to come back to for your legal advice, because that means I get to know you as an investor, I get to know your risk profile, and I can just make it easier for you because I can anticipate what you need and what the next steps would be.
Sure. So what we are hearing is that different states have different laws and different conveyancing rules.
Yes.
And for someone to buy a diversified portfolio like this, it's probably better to talk to someone like you, because you can then compare and really bring that personalization and the know-how. Is that
exactly? Yeah. All the different states have different laws. Some are similar, but they are quite different. For example, Queensland is quite different to New South Wales, where you've got
Sure.
vendor disclosure obligations in New South Wales that you don't necessarily have in Queensland. So we can absolutely help you and understand your risk and make sure you get the result that you want.
So instead of Dr. Kumar talking to 4 different solicitors, he can come to you and talk about doing the comparison. And the speed that he bought, he's probably talking to one person saying, okay, Lindsay, tell me what's really going on with this property, rather than calling 4 people.
Exactly. Yep.
Awesome. And like as I shared before in the scenario that Dr. Kumar didn't really had much money. He was just sitting on 100K in cash. And he was like, okay, how can I build a $6 million portfolio? And that's when we introduced Dr. Kumar to Jesse. So maybe if you don't mind sharing, Jesse, how you went about sourcing or the funding for him.
Yeah, sure. I think I might set the scene a little bit, if that's okay.
Go for it.
So I met Rusty in January of this year, and through a mutual client. And shortly after, Rusty introduced me to Dr. Kumar. Rusty let me know that Dr. Kumar had ambitious plans to build quite a large portfolio quite quickly, so with some tempo. I think it was, looking at building 10 properties over the next 2 years. So I was like, all right, let's go. And I've always been a big believer in the banks see doctors and healthcare professionals as low risk. So they do have policies in place that allow more favourable lending conditions for doctors, and I'm a big believer in take advantage of these terms. So when Rusty came to me with this plan to buy all these properties in quick succession, I thought, well, we don't want to be applying each time and having to provide new documentation every time a new property comes up. So what we did was we created like a blanket approval. So every time a property, Rusty bought us a property and said, this is a property that we're going to buy, we had an aggregate lending limit for Dr. Kumar. So I think it was circa $6 or $7 million we were able to borrow. And every time he was to buy a property, we could take a little bit of that limit, secure it against the property that he was buying, and the overall master limit would reduce, and we could rinse and repeat every time Rusty would come with a property. Another point here is, traditionally, banks, they lend, up to 80%, and if you don't have more than a 20% deposit, they charge an LMI. For doctors, that's not the case. We can go up to 95% for both residential, owner-occupied, and investment property purchases. So you need 5% plus any stamp duty applicable. But in Dr. Kumar's case, he actually had an unencumbered primary place of residence. So what we were able to do is release the equity to cover the deposit and stamp duty on each of these properties. So in essence, he didn't put in any cash contribution. We're able to borrow the whole amount. And if you think about lending, the purpose of the fund is what drives the product, and drives if that's a deductible loan or not. So we were releasing funds for investment purposes, which is traditionally a deductible loan.
Yeah, so just to highlight that point, that though Dr. Kumar didn't really had much money in his pocket, I mean, 100K was more than enough, but he didn't use a single dollar from that money. So it's not impacting his lifestyle. And we were able to, I guess, open the tap of the bank on his principal property of residence.
Yeah, that's right.
So not a single cost to any of the professionals generally came from his pocket. It was all funded. And then he's walking away with 4 properties with that kind of a growth profile.
Yep. I think he's still got that 100K cash in his offset.
It does.
Yeah.
Does.
So, so we borrowed 100% plus cost for all the business. He didn't contribute a dollar. And like we said, obviously, you speak to an accountant to get advice on this. But you know, these are investment loans, so usually they're tax deductible loans as well.
Totally. And this is the other thing, because he's a high tax margin person, whatever expense that we're making or the accounting loss we are making, including the depreciation, is actually helping him with the cash flow as well.
Yeah.
So,
and you know, like many of you in this webinar at the moment, you know, Dr. Kumar is doing a 0.5 staffing in the public system, and he's spending the rest of his time doing, you know, VMO work under his own ABN. So he does incur a large tax bill at the end of the year, and you know, acquiring these properties and maximising on the deductible debt is a great way to reduce his taxable income as well.
totally. And if I can just change the tone here, like right now, Dr. Kumar, it makes a lot of sense for him to buy his personal name for the advice that he got. But Lindsay, would you mind sharing, like, if somebody is buying a different structure, like, you know, and like why they should be thinking about buying a different structure? Of course, that's not really advice we can give here, but A, you can help them, or B, what's the benefit of that?
Yeah, so obviously I can't give financial advice to anyone, but your accountant might give you advice to buy the property in a PCY Ltd company, or as a trustee for a unit trust or a family trust, or whatever vehicle your accountant would recommend that you use. We can jump in and make sure the contract reflects that and make sure the property gets transferred into the correct entity. And that's really used as an asset protection means to make sure that the asset stays with the beneficiaries that it's meant to be held by.
Oh, wonderful. So just in interest of time, so what he really had was a confusion that, okay, how did he go about retiring? All he had was basically this 100K and his fully paid off home. But now he has a clarity that he has built that base portfolio and is still in the process of doing it. We are about to start his second phase of buying in a few months' time. He just wanted to have a bit of breather while he's traveling overseas. But it's more about his prescription for financial freedom. And in his words, like, just like in his words, probably it's better to listen from here, like see whether audio comes through.
Resources to go through each and every property.
No, probably not ideal. So what he's saying is that just like for any medical specialist, like there's a bit of setup done. And similarly, what we are really doing in property investing is that someone like him can actually pick a right team, a buyer's agent. They will do all the due diligence and get the right price and get the right clarity. So that's what we did for him. And sorry about that. So maybe if there's anything else, Jesse, you want to add on that slide that you have here, maybe about tools of trade or?
Yeah. So I touched on it before. You know, I said I'm a big believer in, you know, if the banks see doctors as low risk, then they're going to make it easier for doctors to borrow money. We should be taking advantage of that. You know, there's some points on the screen of you know, why it's different working with a specialist medical lender, but I think the main one that stands out is working with someone who understands doctors and understands healthcare professionals, understands your income, how you're structured, the life cycle of the doctor, and the growth trajectory of your income, and how to best present that to the banks for the most favourable outcome. You know, so often I find a lot of healthcare professionals coming to me, you know, earning a good income, but approaching the bank and not being able to borrow because they didn't have, you know, 2 years tax returns or financials for the practice complete. You know, going through a specialist medical lender, we were actually able to think about these things a bit more commercially. And for example, with Dr. Kumar, I think he had 1 year tax returns, which was when he just transitioned to the ABN work, and then he had a few quarters of BAS for the second year. If you go to a retail bank or a broker or lender, you wouldn't be able to borrow anything because you didn't have the adequate, you know, tick those boxes. So for us, we were able to take a more a more commercial approach, we were able to annualize the strong quarters of the BAS and his remittance for his VMO work, and come up with a projection for that year, which was how we're able to achieve that $6-7 million master limit.
Yeah.
So understanding doctors is the main point that really stands out.
No, totally. No, thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, so maybe Lindsay, over to you. Like, if you can share about your services that you can do as a Avant Law, talking about what type and what structure, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course. So at Avant Law, we can help you with any kind of property work that you need done. So the most common work that we do is buying and selling properties. We can buy residential, off the plan, existing housing. We can buy commercial properties for you, so whether or not that's just a commercial property to invest in, or whether or not it's something that you would run your own practice from. As part of that, we will help you if you need to buy the property in a trust, or if you're buying it in your self-managed super fund as well.
Sure, no, thank you.
Just on that quickly, if you go back to this slide, I think it's a good point to mention the way the Avant Finance business works. It's split up into two parts. So on one side, we on the residential side, we broker. You can see we've access to over 30 lenders with 400 products, but we have strategic partnerships with a lot of the major lenders that gives us special access to special policies and more favourable terms and pricing for doctors. So we broker in the residential space, and then in the commercial space, so anything that's tools of trade. So business use vehicles, buying into a practice. Purchasing commercial property to practice out of, even fitting that property out, even buying commercial property in super. We can actually lend Avant's money for tools of trade to doctors, so that we can be flexible on policy and price. And
no, that is so awesome. Like when we were talking with working with Dr. Kumar, he certainly wanted to check around, but then talk to someone. I said, no, you guys are best because you really understood where they're coming from. Of course, Avant Finance, doctors by doctors for doctors.
we actually did do after we did those 4 properties. We actually have done a business use vehicle for them as well.
Oh yeah, of course.
Through the Avant.
Yes, there we go. So it's more holistic rather than just talking about property. There are other segments as well in Avant, probably would know, talking about other investing. So yeah. So maybe if you don't mind, of course, we really need your colleague here talking about the estate planning. So maybe you want to talk about this element as well.
Of course. So the whole idea of buying property is to have a secure asset. As I said before, something you can touch, something you can feel, something that's real. But part of that is that we have to secure that for you as well. So that's making sure that the property stays with you, that you're able to manage it properly. And so where we come in is making sure that you structure it from the beginning, get that advice from the accountant, make sure it's properly structured. If you're buying a property with someone else, then make sure you've got some kind of an agreement with that person that you're buying with. So for example, if you're buying a practice with a couple of doctors, make sure you've got an agreement between you as to what happens if something goes wrong. Make sure you've got your loans all secure and everything else. Jesse will help you with that. But the most important thing I think you can do is make sure that your estate that you've built up, that property portfolio, is secure for your next generation should anything happen. And that's where I work quite closely with one of my colleagues in Avant Law, Michael Mobley. So Michael helps with structuring or helps set up the trusts and whatnot. If you're setting it up that way, Michael can help with the self-managed super fund purchases. But also the estate planning team can help you with your wills and making sure that the property can be passed down to future generations as well.
Not exactly, and this is a great point. Like, it's not really just a business of building wealth, but it's also about how do we go about protecting it and passing it on to the next generation as the legacy that you would like to leave behind. So where from here? So of course we need to have a team. As you can appreciate, there's a lot of team members like lawyers, accountants, financial planners, brokers, property strategists, buyer's agent. So of course, once you have built a team, you have a choice to go and buy a property on your own, research on your own. There's a lot that becomes very hard. But then other is like taking a very professional approach, professional help. We can buy or save you time, save you from the stress of buying that property, avoid costly mistakes. Buying property is not only stressful, it's actually full of risk of things going wrong. But the way we do it, just like what we saw in the examples of Dr. Kumar and Dr. Lam, was that we were able to buy the property probably lower than what the asking price was. So we made money just by buying the right property, but also buying those properties which are growing well. Just like Dr. Lamb's example, there was about 11% growth within the first 5 months. So it's effectively professionally doing like if I sprain my knee, I won't really just go on Google on my own, but rather I will look for the best specialist in the area. So it's the same thing, but for someone who has done it successfully, who has been doing it very well, for someone like us, we are really talking about a holistic approach of building wealth through property. So how do we help? It's data-driven research, just like the way we look at all the data. It's personalized attention. It's your GPS, it's your journey, rather than saying, okay, anyone can buy this property. It's more about yours. Seek diversity. We have access to other service providers, just like what we are talking about. We also need the local property manager, the building and pest inspector, and the like. So we can really build the team around it for you to really take advantage of the beautiful asset class property, which lots of people who get it have made huge, just like what I shared. Top 200 people in the rich list have made money from real estate. The way we have done it, it's not really just like a black box, you just do this. It's not like that. We focus on the education. Hence the requirement of what we share as the data or the knowledge around this book. We have access to off-market listings. Like that's very spatial to the buyer's agent who operate in that area. And for us, it's not about the transaction of buying a property. It's more about the relationship, because more, we can buy property for you. Probably we're working for more. It's more of a relationship rather than the transaction. The key thing I would like to highlight, which actually differentiates us in a big way, is that we're independent. And what it means is that we have no stock to sell. When we are working for you, for your requirement, for your strategy, building your team for you, without really having any hidden agenda. We're working for you, and then on top of it, it's holistic approach of building wealth. So key takeaways in interest of time. Your high income level, the tax rate that you're paying allows you to leverage loads, which probably help, we can go to the likes of Jesse to get it. Buying a property is easy. Anyone can buy 1 or 2 properties, but how do we go about building that successful portfolio? It's not that straightforward. It's a really specialized role. Just like you specialize in your particular segment in the medical industry, buying a property is also a very specialized role. And we really need a robust team, just like what we have, the colleagues here, and a bit more. And then the reason why we have chosen to go for property investing is the leverage. You just put only 5% or 10% of your money to have that exposure of 100% in the property. But just like financial leverage, it's a knowledge leverage is very critical. Like what property to buy, for what price, and more importantly, why to buy that property. So these are the key takeaways. And as we shared in the beginning, like Kimberly, so thanks for that. Other than the book that actually created, there's a doctor's guide talking about the elements around it. So you can choose to get this 20-pager guide. It's specifically for doctors. Here's a QR code. And for someone who would like to use just a phone, maybe they can SMS on this number with their full name, email, and just put the word doctor. This will be delivered in your inbox. And otherwise, you can grab this copy of the book, use this QR code, or jump onto this website and use the code AVANT24 so that you don't even have to worry about the shipping. Feel free to take a screenshot of the screen if you like, but then I open the floor for questions. And while we are waiting for the questions, anyone would like to connect with any one of us, here's the screen for the QR codes. Over to you, Kimberly.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Rusty. We have quite a few questions coming through. So just an important note to leave your name on there so we can get in touch with you if we aren't able to answer your questions during this webinar. So let's start off with you, Rusty. Commercial versus residential property, pros and cons. What's your preference?
Great. Actually, I have a slide for that, but very quickly, it's more around commercial is typically for the cash flow, and residential, generally speaking, is classified more for the growth. But there are pros and cons, so maybe residential or commercial. So there are benefits of lower entry cost, higher demand. It's easier financing and less complex to understand. But then the pros of commercial property is the higher rental yield. It's long-term leases, tenants pay all the outgoings, and it adds to the diversification, because typically people have their own home as a residential property. Buying a commercial property makes a lot of sense as a diversification. But then the negative of residential is it's a lower yield, shorter leases, and it's all the expenses are paid by the owner. So it's more I guess, involved, or like more involvement is required compared to commercial. But then the challenge with the commercial is that, yes, it's a long-term lease, but so is the long-term vacancy if there is one. So the key thing is not really about residential versus commercial. I really go back to the same blueprint of the strategy that we are talking about, that in the beginning, when we are acquiring portfolio, we really need to be thinking about what sort of leverage we have, what sort of risk we have in the early stages before we move to commercial. So for someone like me, I'll be building a very base robust portfolio on the residential side. I mean, generally speaking, of course, it really depends on your personal circumstances, going back to your strategy. And then when we are really thinking about coming to that stage whereby we have built enough equity, we're really talking about the rent, then we slowly transition into from residential to commercial. It's not a one size fits all. It really comes down to your strategy, what suits you.
Great. Next question we have is for Jesse. How do I borrow 100% for property investments?
So I think we touched on this earlier in the example with Dr. Kumar. So we can lend, or if you go through a specialist medical lender, you're able to lend up to 95% against property for either owner-occupied or investment purposes. And that can be principal interest, it could be interest-only loans. We get that 95%. The ways to get the other 5%, there's a number of different ways. So one would be to leverage equity in your existing properties. So it could be the case that you own an investment property already and you're taking equity out of that one to fund the next one. So we would typically refinance that property. You'd have a separate loan split, which would be an equity release, which is purposed for the next property. And it would be the same if you were releasing equity against your owner-occupied home loan. So you'd have your owner-occupied loan with finance, and that would remain unchanged. It would still be an owner-occupied loan, usually principal interest repayments. And then we'd have a separate split, which would be an equity release for the purpose of investment property purchase. Other ways you can do it is by guarantor. So if you have a family member who is willing to go guarantor, they would put their property on as a second security. Essentially, you'd be borrowing 100% plus the costs, and the borrowers are responsible for making the repayments on the full loan. But that deposit and stamp duty that you're lacking will be secured against the family member's property. So they would be liable if you defaulted on your repayments.
Awesome. Lindsay, I've bought a property with my brother-in-law. Are there any concerns?
Yes, there are. I touched on this just a little bit earlier. Some of the concerns that you've got with that, and it is better to have, spread the risk and have another owner if possible. But one of the concerns that I have with that is what happens in the event of a dispute with the other co-owner. So things happen in life, and perhaps the person that you purchased a property with has lost their job or can't afford to pay the rates. You will have issues with that. So what we normally recommend in that situation is before you actually enter into the contract, enter into some kind of a co-owner's agreement with that person, so that you can resolve issues in the event of a dispute. You can work out where the payment liability falls. If one person can't pay, you can work out what the share of ownership would be and if that's going to change over time. But effectively, we need to have some sort of an exit if there is a dispute, and how you manage that in an amicable way. Because if you don't have an agreement between the parties, then it might end up in court, which is going to cost you a lot more money than it would have to set it up properly from the beginning.
Cool. I'll do one more for you, Rusty. People seem to make a lot of money in shares. How would you compare investment properties?
Yeah, so as we were talking about, the shares has given 11.2, whereas properties has given 10.9. It's risky. The key thing of share investing is that even with a small amount of money, you can go and buy a property, buy shares at any point of time using any share platform. But what really makes the property stand out is the leverage, like using only 5% of the money and buying the whole property or getting access to the 100% of it. So as an example here, if the property market has given about 11%, are pretty much similar as you can see, but blue line is a lot more smoother. But then you don't really need to have that much money. As long as we are risk aware, we know what we are really doing. We're not doing more than what we can buy it. We have enough cash in the buffer, or the risk buffer is there. Then as long as the liquidity requirement doesn't really get imposed on us, then of course residential property market makes a lot. Property market in general makes a lot of sense. But again, this is really subjective to the individual, the circumstances, and also all sort of negative gearing and everything does apply in those selling shares as well. But leveraging share market without the risk of the call margin, because it's so volatile, as you can see, the blue line is a lot more volatile. The red line is a lot more volatile. So we might think that, okay, we have leveraged our portfolio to buy shares, but then something might happen and then it can bring back, over valuation that might actually call for a margin call. So the key thing here is to really go back to the individual blueprint, what it really means to you, and then buy accordingly. So it really comes down to the overall savings plan, risk profile, leverage. And of course, it's all about diversification. Risk profile in shares, yes, it's more liquid, just like what we saw yesterday. There was a bloodbath in the share market,
Yeah.
but property owners were not really too worried as long as they know they can stand the storm of the market outlook. But then again, it comes down to the quality of the property that we are buying. The blue chip properties or even affordable properties, if you look at the history of of those kind of properties, they are a lot more safer, but maybe less liquid. So that is the only thing, the liquidity and the risk. Other than that, like if you know what we are talking about, then probably someone like me, who's a CFA, chartered financial analyst, who has managed $2 billion funds, I would like to put eggs in this basket and watch over it.
Thanks, Rusty, and thanks, Jesse and Lindsay as well. We are conscious of your time, so we will have to wrap it up there, unfortunately. But again, if your question wasn't answered during this webinar or in the Q&A box, we will get in touch with you directly if you have left your contact details. But otherwise, keep an eye out for the next episode. We'll have Mornay Lombard alongside an accountant to answer your questions. So yeah, otherwise, have a great night, and thank you so much for attending this webinar.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.